Welcome. We have a very special guest today, artist Julian Raven. You see the illustration from his cover of his memoir, Odious and Cerberus, an American immigrant's odyssey and his free speech legal war against the corruption, a true story by artist Julian Raven. And here it is on Kindle. Oops. You can download it instantly after watching this, and I'm sure Julian will be very happy. The reason we're talking to him today is, and I know Julian from when I lived in Washington, and I actually wrote about his lawsuit against the Smithsonian, is that he sued the Smithsonian over a Trump picture he painted that he thought should go into the National Portrait Gallery to balance all the famous Democrats they were showing. And he can talk a little bit about that. But it became a big legal case. He worked with his own lawyer. In the end, I think you lost, but you had a ruling from a judge that the Smithsonian was federal. We'll talk about that. Your case might be precedent that might be helpful for the White House because President Trump, as some of you may know, fired the head of the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, Kim Sajet, or he thought he did, because she didn't go. Here's the Washington Post article. It says, defying Trump, Kim Sajet is still at work. And this article describes how she comes in every day, has meetings, makes decisions, spends money. She's ignoring President Trump's firing, says he has no authority, and she's backed up by Lonnie Bunch, who's the director of the Smithsonian as a whole, and also, curiously, the person above Lonnie Bunch, none other than John Roberts, who Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So we'll have to see what happens if this ever reaches the court, where he falls, or if he recuses himself, or what, because this is a strange separation of powers case, because the board of the Smithsonian also has congressmen and senators and even Vice President J.D. Vance on it. So it's a true hybrid or bastard organization, depending on however you want to call it. And so if Julian can tell us a little bit about his case and why he thinks it's relevant right now to President Trump thinking he fired Kim Sajet, but her not go.
Larry, good afternoon, and it's good to be back with you once again as we continue this ongoing dilemma about the Smithsonian, the unsolved mystery of the Smithsonian Institution. So there was a lot that you mentioned there, a lot of points that I could address one by one, but I think the pressing question is whether or not the President of the United States can actually fire an employee of the Smithsonian Institution, doesn't matter who it is. And my case, and I mentioned that in my email to you, was that the end ruling that I had appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, where they refused to take my case, where they should have, because that would have answered this question right now. They would have clarified this ongoing unresolved question of federal law, which is what actually is the definition or the entity status of the Smithsonian Institution. That question, they refused to answer it, which is a big mistake, I believe. It was personally devastating to me because I believe they were obligated by law themselves to answer that question, which is the role of the Supreme Court, which is to answer all controversies and questions dealing with law, and especially federal law. And this is a big question. Now I hope that this case, that the president, having fired or attempted to fire Kim Sajet, the director of the National Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, I hope that in some way it's litigated and it arrives back at the Supreme Court, where they finally have to rule on that, because it will ultimately vindicate me. They're responsible. So I'm very excited to see how this all works out.
All right, could you tell us a little bit about the specifics of your case? And why did you say odious versus Cerberus?
Odious and Cerberus, both of those words were given by the federal judge, who determined that Kim Sajet's behavior and treatment of me was odious. And he also mentioned that the Smithsonian Institution, as the image on the behind your head, you can see me there going up the steps of the Smithsonian to battle the three-headed hound of hell, or guarding the hound. Cerberus is that mythical creature from Greek mythology, and it guards the gates of Hades. And there it is, symbolically three-headed, representing the three branches of the federal government. And the judge himself called the Smithsonian Cerberus-like. And so in him even doing that, he was admitting, although he then avoided wading into those weeds, that the Smithsonian itself is in that state in violation of the separation of powers, because you cannot have a board meeting where the vice president, the Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, 3 members of Congress and 3 members of the Senate sitting at the same table with 9 members of the public making decisions in a quorum, and that being the voice of the federal government in unison. Impossible. It's in violation of the separation of powers. And so where my case makes this very interesting is because the judge ruled that the Smithsonian was a federal agency, quote unquote, through and through, in order to deprive me of my rights of participation and my constitutional rights. So this is a wonderful moment for me. I'm hoping that they will push this all the way so that they will actually get clarification, because it's impossible that this organization runs and is run by all of the branches of the federal government in concert, speaking in one voice as the federal government. It's impossible.
Could you tell us exactly the citation? Who was the judge, and what was the name of the case, and what date did the ruling come down?
It's Judge Trevor McFadden, and the case number was 01240 TNM, and that he was ruled in, I think it was the end of 2019, I believe it was, when he made that ruling. So if you research Raven versus Sajet online, you'll find a few cases, because I've sued her twice, but you'll find the Judge Trevor McFadden case, and then you'll find the Judge Christopher Cooper case, which is the most recent one. And both of those have rulings now. So yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting, because the first judge, McFadden, in my case, his ruling was so sloppy and unconstitutional and fabricated, because he didn't make any citation to any authority. He just said, oh no, the Smithsonian's the government, through and through, basically. And I said, no, it's impossible. It can't be. There's no way on earth it can be the government. It's a private trust. It's in all the documents. It's written in black and white for 150 years. It's clearly stated by all of the authorities that have been, important in that case. Even, President Taft, who was Supreme Court Justice Taft in the beginning of the 19th century or 20th century, in the 1900s, he said himself, the Smithsonian is merely, the federal government is merely a trustee of the Smithsonian, but the Smithsonian has no part of the federal government. It's right there in black and white.
You've sort of frozen now, but maybe you'll come back and be okay. I'm wondering if you'd tell me about the second case with Judge Cooper. What was that about, and what did he decide?
Well, I was blocked on Twitter when X was called Twitter by Kim Sayed. She blocked me, and so it was one of those, can a federal employee, because that's the crossover of the Smithsonian, that even though it's a private trust, it's a charity, it has, not all, but many of its employees are paid by the federal government. And so as a branch, or as a look at the illustration I came up with was like the hand in glove. Like the glove is the Smithsonian Institution, and the hand inside of it that's making it work is the federal government, but it's not the federal government. So she had blocked me on Twitter, and I then sued her for my rights of speech that she was depriving me of. And that went on for a couple of years, right up to the beginning of this year. And that ruling is is bizarre. You have to read it. You wouldn't believe the first sentence of it, Larry. You'd be so outraged to hear how. And he was Cooper was if he wasn't a Clinton, he was an Obama appointee. He was so hostile to me in the first sentence of the ruling. He mocked me, and a judge was mocking in the first sentence of the ruling. It was so disparaging. I was like, I can't believe this. I can't believe that this man is writing this as a federal judge. So that was still in the works as far as whether I'm going to appeal that or not. I don't know if I have the strength anymore.
Well,
the
what did
energy
he
to do that,
decide? What did he decide? Give us the bottom line.
Oh, the bottom line is again, no rights, no free speech rights.
Because
the argument on the Twitter arguments is whether, and this was that ruling that came out, I think it was now 2 years ago, at the Supreme Court, which was trying to define when a government employee acting on social media was actually speaking or representing or acting in the color of their authority. And it was so clear that she was using the official Smithsonian website, because it was the MPG director, which in the old case they had changed it over, if you remember, to try to privatize it to protect her from using that as a violation of her duty. And that was the Hatch Act issue that came up. So he basically said she didn't do anything wrong and that her account wasn't a government account. It was like, I can't win against this. This is unbelievable. It's shocking, to be honest, Larry. And when you read that verdict, you'll be very, very surprised.
Now, ironically, you and President Trump seem to be in the same boat, except now the Smithsonian is suing him. But this status issue, what is the Smithsonian? Is it government? Is it private? Is it some kind of unholy spawn that's neither nor or both and what is its legal?
Yeah, it's definitely morphed over time into what it's become, not by law, but by abuse. And so when you clear away all of the abuse, it's very clear what it is. And wonderfully, there are multiple other lawsuits, Supreme Court decisions that completely back me up, whether it's the Girard Trust in Philadelphia. That's one of the clearest parallel versions from the same period of time. The incredible guy that was this illiterate French maritime sailor who became this multi-millionaire buying and selling ships at that time. When he died, he left all of his money to the city of Philadelphia, and he created a trust that the city was to run the trust, but it was a private trust. And that brought up the whole issue of whose trust is this? Is this the government? Is it private? And it basically is the same thing. It's a private trust that the government of Philadelphia they had established a board of regents themselves in this trust run by the government, that it was clearly a private organization. They're just functioning as trustees. And when you function as a trustee, you're not functioning in your official capacity as whatever title you have as a government official. You're functioning as the trustee, not as the government official. And so
if that's true, then say Justice Roberts or Vice President Vance, they're there as private citizens. Just because they have that job, but it's not part of their job.
Exactly.
Okay.
You nailed it, Larry.
That would say that it is private, and then that President Trump has no say, right?
Absolutely. And for me, as far as speech rights, this was another case of that LeBron case, which was the railroad case, where LeBron sued the Pennsylvania station for not displaying his ad, and he won at the Supreme Court because they said even though Amtrak was a federal corporate creation, it was a private and is run as a private entity. The board who runs Amtrak were government appointed employees or officials, and because of that, it was enough association with the government to guarantee constitutional protections to LeBron. So in my case, it would be the same in the other case, which is Girard Trust against Pennsylvania. There, clearly, again, the board of trustees were government appointed, and it still gave constitutional protections to participants in the trust. That's me. And so I've been denied that continually at the Smithsonian, and yet it's identical to these other cases. So that's why I'm excited, because if this goes before the Supreme Court, they have to look at those cases and say, well, it's just the same as Girard. I'm talking identical, Larry. It's identical. Girard was a French guy, although he did become an American, like James Smithson, who was a British guy who never came to the United States. These were private individuals who gave a vast sum of money to the government to take care of and build a trust that it was their will that controlled the trust, like with the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian Institution should be governed by the will of James Smithson, a British man from England whose personal private will is being executed because he gave money to do it. Not the president's will, not the federal government's will, not Kim Sayet's will. It's James Smithson's will. Now, granted, the trustees of that will have the right and the responsibility to interpret it and to forward the application of what that will meant. That's their job.
So who can fire Kim Sayet?
The Board of Trustees, the Board of Regents. And I think they're going to fire her on Monday, because on Monday, it's the biannual meeting. I might go to DC on the 9th. I want to go down there. I want to stand outside the castle with my banner of my book once again. I was looking at it today saying, I think I've got to go. So Monday, this is another big complaint that I had. This is a private company run, but they've taken federal funds and they have private meetings, and no one can go into the meeting and hear what they're doing with all of the $700 million of taxpayer money that they have appropriated each year. So it's crazy. But anyway, they have that meeting on Monday. I would love to be in that meeting, Larry, because I believe if they don't fire her, I believe they're going to force her to resign. And I think they're going to say, if they have any sense, they're going to say, Kim Sayet, you've caused this problem. This problem goes back all the way to Raven. It has to. It was there. It's been front page. It's common knowledge. They're going to say all of this disrepute, which is one of the main requirements of Smithsonian employees, is that they don't bring discredits. They don't discredit the institution. They don't bring a bad reputation. She's just been the genesis of this, and now she's the focus of the president, and the defiance. All of this action. I think they're going to say, you know what, it's time for you to move on, and we'll accept your resignation. I think that's what they'll do. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it might be what you want. It might be what I want. But you could argue equally, as far as I know, Lonnie Bunch, who I don't even understand why he's head of the Smithsonian. He's very, very left wing. If you go to the African American Museum, which he used to run, there's an Emmett Till room. I mean, it could have been designed by the Communist Party in like the 1940s or something. It's surreal, and the whole thing is just a story of oppression and basically, to me, it looked like something out of socialist realism, and yet he was considered a great hero, I suppose, for raising a lot of money, but. It's like you come out of that going, America is a racist, oppressive, colonialist, evil country that should be destroyed. When you could have easily told the story that, look what a great country this is. The theme from slavery to freedom, and people at the end, they have all this achievement and all these good things. You could have had a very feel-good experience there. But instead, it's just like... America is evil, and that's our national museum. Really, is that what you want in a country? And is that the kind of messaging you want the world to see? When you're confronting other things. I mean, it struck me as very odd, because it wasn't just that Clarence Thomas at that time didn't have anything, but it was like peculiar, because I had been in the former Soviet Union, and I had seen Soviet style exhibits, and it was like, well, this is rather Soviet style. It's like strange that it's an American museum.
But that said, his job seems safe, and he's backing her. And we saw that Catherine Mayer at NPR, after a disastrous testimony before Congress, where she basically admitted she lies, she doesn't believe in truth, she's a political operative, blah, 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 blah. She still has her job at NPR. So, I mean, these people, why do you think anyone would get rid of them? I mean, nobody's gotten rid of anybody.
Well, you would think that just because of the attention that's being drawn, that would do it. And then because I think the control in Congress has the purse strings, and the president, I think, can affect that quite dramatically. I think at the end of the day, money will really talk there. And that's the only thing that they've ever responded to. When there was that other controversy all those years ago with Clough, the other secretary, and with the exhibit that was pulled, that he pulled the exhibit, there was that exhibition regarding AIDS, and then the crucifix that was covered in ants and blood, and they had all the outrage from Bill Donahue, I believe it was. And
You're talking about Serrano and Piss Christ?
No, it was the I can't remember his name, but it was the crucifix covered with blood and ants on a video at the show.
Oh.
And that was pulled by Clough. He pulled that specific part of the exhibition. The rest he left up, and there was a massive outrage. And he, at that time, again, Congress, they had threatened him with the budget, and he got really nervous, and so he jumped to it, and he basically, cat's jumping around, jumped to it and got the thing pulled, and it was because of money. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's going to be the president's biggest persuasive, influence, is that he can control Congress, or those in Congress who control the purse strings. And 700 million, they operate on $700 million a year from the taxpayer, and $300 million from private donations. So I think that they will suffer greatly if that's impacted in any way. I mean, right now I think I heard 13%. I don't think that's enough. I think it's got to be a threat of more, like 20 or 30 or 40, or maybe who knows how much they can, and push it back to being a private museum. It should never have government appropriations. The money from the Smithsonian, the bequeath, James Smithsonian's bequest, was sufficient to run that museum without government interference. But the federal government borrowed the money, don't forget. When they got it, they borrowed it, and it's like vanished. It's never been repaid. So this is how I said the abuse has happened over, the thing has morphed into this beast that I hope that reform will bring it back to its clear identity, and the delineations will be made, and then it will function as it was originally meant to function.
So you were saying if the Smithson bequest had simply been prudently invested over the years, it would have grown over time to cover all the needs of the Smithsonian.
Oh, absolutely.
And they wouldn't need federal money. And the federal money is there to cover up for the waste, fraud, and abuse, bad investing, possible embezzlement. God knows what else has been going on there.
Well, it was they wanted to run the Smithsonian on the 6% annual interest they were paying on that time, which is equivalent. That was like $585,000. I think they said equivalent to like $80 million. They were going to pay 6% interest. That was sufficient, way sufficient at that time, to run the museum. It was just empty buildings. And all of the content that they received was from the public. It all came from the general public. They didn't have to spend a penny. They just needed to organize it and catalog it. That's all that Smithsonian was to do. It was just basically organize and catalog all this information. So
gifts. They were supposed to take gifts.
Gifts. That's it.
They weren't supposed to acquire things for cash.
Well, they could do that. There was no prohibition on acquisition. It could be donations, acquisitions. That's how the trustees had the liberty to run it like that. But that's I worked it out, Larry. I worked out and said, well, $585,000. 1846. It was actually 1835, and they had the money for 10 years. They sat around like thumbing their noses before they actually did anything. But that amount of money over this time we're talking about a lot of money. If we're to say, well, I think the federal government should give back this bequest to the trust and let it operate as it should, that's a big chunk of change that I have to come up with suddenly. So be very interesting. I think, listen, Larry, the possibility, and that's why I'm excited that this pushes all these issues to the forefront, and they're all in my book there. I brought all of them up. I mean, you read it, you saw it, you walked that journey with me. All those, I documented them all, that people can look at it as a reference book and say, wow, look at this stuff. I'm not making this up. It's all there in black and white.
Let me ask you another question. You yourself are an artist. You have an art studio. You happen to be a born-again Christian, as I understand it. Is there someone out there who could replace Kim Sajet, who's more qualified and might be more open to different points of view, let's say? Do you know of anybody, if you had to say, I think this person would make a better director for the National Portrait Gallery?
I think that until the definition of the entity status happens, you're going to constantly have this problem right now that we have, because once it's clearly defined as a private charity whose mission is to fulfill the will of James Smithson, which is the increase and diffusion of knowledge amongst men. That's what it was. That's his will. It's only a few words. He wanted an institution to be called the Smithsonian according to his name, put his name up in lights, and then it would be for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. So it's going to be like
the Royal Academy for the United States, right?
Well, it could be. I mean, but once I think that mission is defined, and this is what we're doing, and this is what should be pursued, I not that it would be easier, but I think that you're going to remove a lot of this, the politics, in the sense of what's happened. The politicization of it has been used as a political tool for all these years. Not to say that it wouldn't, but it's and then you could maybe be more likely to find, if possible, a centrist-minded person who's going to be a little bit more open, because it's clear that they are opposed. She is opposed. Sajet is opposed. Hostile. I applied, Larry, to have my paintings displayed again this year. I applied and got rejected again. So but this time I was rejected politely.
Well, I guess that's progress. That's progress.
And I got it all in writing. I applied again, and I said, so but again, it's a violation of the will of James Smithson, because, if the museum functions around growing the knowledge base and the increase and diffusion of knowledge, and if you're presented with an increase of knowledge in the arts, and you refuse that increase of knowledge, and you say, we don't want any more knowledge because we don't like that knowledge, then you have a problem of violating the will again. So that's another interesting
that's
question.
actually interesting in terms of donor intent. If you're trying to decrease knowledge or suppress knowledge, you're contrary to the intent of the donor.
Yeah, you're breaching the trust.
Now, was that an argument you made in your case?
I did. That was the breach of trust arguments. Well, it's not a trust, it's the federal government. McFadden.
Well, now wait, stop right there. If you have a court ruling that it's the federal government, then President Trump can indeed fire Kim Sajet, right?
No, because it's the federal government.
Why can't you cite that?
As Congress? It's Congress who's the body that is in charge of it. Congress accepted the responsibility as trustee. That's in the document.
Okay,
Congress.
Wait. Does Congress mean House and Senate together, or does it mean, yes, I guess, because Vance is on it? But then it means Congress has Republicans. Couldn't Congress order her fired? A simple 51 vote resolution. Why has no one submitted a resolution to Congress to fire Kim Sajet?
That's because they don't know how they're operating. I don't think they realize that they are the trustees. I don't think that the body of Congress. When I had Joe Semplinsky.
Okay, so Vice President Vance is sitting in these meetings. He doesn't even know what he's doing. He doesn't know that he can get a resolution passed by Congress and she can be fired.
Yeah, but he could get a resolution in a quorum on Monday, because there are although I don't think they're all Republicans that are sitting on the
No,
Board
I'm
of
sure it's
Regents.
half and half.
And you have 9 members of the public, but he could try to get a majority vote there to fire her.
Yeah, but
And
if
not,
he doesn't get a majority vote there, he should
you
have a
could
resolution in
absolutely,
Congress to
absolutely,
fire Kim Sajet just to
absolutely.
get Trump's thing through. Get one look, if they want to get one thing through Congress, they want to get their big, beautiful bill, which I've always been very critical of omnibus bills, and I didn't know, I'm not an expert, but I don't know that I would do this, but they think they can. But I would, before you do anything else, because they passed all sorts of funny stuff, fire Kim Sajet to show you can do something.
I know,
you can get some
and
results.
but Larry, but that's exactly, if Congress suddenly realizes, and I had to educate the congressman here in my district, and I said, you are a trustee of the Smithsonian Institution. You, Congress, accepted that responsibility. You, as trustees, appointed a board of regents who you gave the responsibility to. But the board of regents, if they're not doing their job, you can fire the board of regents. You could
and what you're saying is that can be done by a simple resolution of Congress. I mean,
absolutely.
A simple bill comes through, HR, I don't know, 27 or whatever, and a bill to remove Lonnie Bunch, Kim Sajet, and all the other directors of all of the Smithsonian, because the whole place, as far as I can tell, is a nest of leftists. It's undermining America.
Yeah, bypass the Board of Regents, and you could say you could
now
reform.
Tell me, since I'm enjoying this. It's hypothetical since I'm retired. I don't do this anymore. But who in Congress is on the committee that oversees the Smithsonian? It used to be the Rules Committee, because years ago, Senator Stevens was on the Rules Committee and asked me to do some research for him on something or other. And so I learned that, in fact, the Rules Committee controls the Smithsonian. So who's on the Rules Committee? Or why don't you have an advocate right there? Have you been in touch with them?
I'm going to be honest with you. I became so discouraged at the beginning of this year. This free speech case to me was such a home run, but I got so. I was so disheartened again. I don't have the heart.
Well, I think we know that Mitch McConnell is chair of the Rules Committee, so he may not be very sympathetic to anything. But is there someone else?
All it would take is somebody actually to take this by the horns and say we're going to now look at this, find out actually who we are, and then act. Oh, absolutely.
Here's a question. Could somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene just introduce a straight resolution in Congress going around the committee structure to remove these people?
That is, I'm not sure. I don't know. I would not know how that works. I imagine
because she had the Doge committee,
and because
she could do it through the Doge committee.
All of the
because what it's about is a government agency that is corrupt, wasteful, abusive, not fulfilling.
Yeah, but it's not a government agency, Larry. It's not. They are caretakers of a private charity. That's what it is.
Okay, it's about a government appointed officials violating a sacred trust. That's even worse.
That's it. You got it, Larry. That's the whole. That was my book.
So we've got to get Marjorie Taylor Greene to hold a hearing like she held with NPR. That's what has to be done.
That if that happens, that would do it, because they have much more control in that setting, because it's so clearly in the establishment document of the Smithsonian. It's so clear what the role of Congress is, and it's like, well, this is who we are. All you need is a vote, a majority vote, and you can do what you want. It's right there in that act of 1846.
And I think the mere threat of the vote would then force the regents to act. In fact, I mean, if it came up in Congress, it rose to that level, they'd go, well, there are an awful lot of art history PhDs out there who could run the portrait gallery. I mean, in other words, it's not hard to find people.
But listen, remember this.
We could even have a new director of the Smithsonian. We could have a
Well,
God Bless America director instead of a goddamn America director,
yeah,
right?
well, absolutely. But listen, this remember, Congresswoman Eleanor Norton Holmes, who has been in Congress for decades. She's a DC Congresswoman.
And
She put a
ironically, she
bill.
has no vote.
I'm not sure. Well, she put a bill in 10,
The
15
Democrats
years ago
gave her a
to,
vote, but she doesn't actually have a right to a vote.
well, because of it being, yeah, a DC. I didn't know how that
DC
functioned,
is
but
not a state,
yeah,
but
I know,
she
I know.
acts as if she does.
She does. Well, she put a bill in the floor of the House 10, 15 years ago to reform the Smithsonian, to get rid of the Board of Regents, and to do, and
Oh,
so that was ignored as always. They didn't do anything about it. So the reforming of the Board of Regents would be a great start. Get the congressmen off, get them all off there. And if it's going to be private, let it be a private institution to function as it was. There was no stipulation by Smithson that it had to be people who were government officials. Let it just be private and get the government out of there and get the $700 million out of there. And then you deprive these leftists who are using it as a tool to promote their agenda on the taxpayer's dime. And it's insane.
but you know what happened the other way around was the private galleries were taken over by the Smithsonian, the Corcoran, the Freer, etc.
Very possibly, yeah, because of the budget, taxpayer budget. They have
Yeah,
the money and the power to do it. That's
yeah.
what they've done. So I think that there's a
So,
good argument to say get it out. If you're going to have a government museum, let it be 100% government, and that's what they've tried to do. Those rulings, Larry, that morphed the identity of the Smithsonian from a private charity and just turned it into a nationalized institution with no legislation, with no vote in Congress, with nothing, just the will of a judge who at the flick of a pen decided to change the entity status of an institution that was private, that belonged to a private citizen.
but if it were private, then you wouldn't have a right. Here's the picture again of you with your Trump picture bringing it up the steps. If it's a
No, of course you
private
have a right.
institution, they can say no, right?
No, 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 no. It's a charity. It's a trust that's controlled by trust law. And so you have rights as beneficiaries of the trust. The trust was given to the American people. To Smithson, he said he was giving his bequest was to the United States of America. So that's the other question. Well, who did he give this money to? And that was this legal 10 years. They debated for 10 years how could they receive this money. The United States of America was ended up being there. This is the people of America. He gave the money to the people, and so we are the beneficiaries of the trust. We have rights to participate in the trust. Like I said, when they opened the doors to the Smithsonian in 1846, it was empty buildings, and they just put out to the public, bring your stuff. The public, the trustees gave the public their participation, inviting them to bring their knowledge to the Smithsonian, your museum, come and fill it with American stories, American history, American artifacts, American art, American this, American that. It was a place where Americans participated in the trust, active participation. So I had rights as a beneficiary, and they denied me those rights because they said it's no longer a trust. And then I had free speech rights because even though it's a private charity, it's run and operated by government-appointed trustees. That's enough. Scalia said in LeBron versus Railroad, he said that's enough for the government to be accountable for the Constitution, that you're protected, that your free speech rights are protected if you participate in the Smithsonian Institution. I win both ways, but up until now, I'm the lunatic out in the field that people have laughed at for years, and hopefully my vindication will come, Larry.
Well, so was Vincent van Gogh. Let me
Yeah.
ask you another question. There's the Archives of American Art. That's run by the Smithsonian. It's supposed to have works and documents and catalog entries of American artists. Have you been listed there?
I have no idea. I would probably have been blacklisted there, if anything.
That's another thing you can look into, because that also seems to be a very complicated setup. So
yeah, all I can say about my experience, Larry, as I think you know pretty well, but my personal experience has been oftentimes traumatic. It's been that bad. It's been heart-wrenching. The book was basically a a story, a catalog of just the discouragements that I had. It was so, for me, overwhelming, because to me, it's so clear when you look at it, so clear. And what she did was so egregious. And this is so bizarre. The judge calls her behavior. He ruled that her behavior was odious and partisan and yet perfectly legal. And you're like, what type of world does that happen in? Where a government employee can be partisan and her actions are odious and yet still perfectly legal. Insane.
Well, welcome to Washington, I think they would say.
Yeah,
But,
insane. Yeah, well,
the-
I'm not made for that place. I just suffered too much. It was too much pain. Heartache, Larry. It's absolute heartache. And you got to read it. I'll send it to you after we're done. I'll send you the link to Cooper's decision, and you will laugh when you read the first sentence. He mocks. He's like, "Oh, this is Julian Raven again with his little campaign against the Smithsonian Institution." I mean, you're like, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me that a judge is saying this. I know these judges. It's very sad how judges can be so. They're just so. There should be limits on their ability to stay in their position. It should be much easier to fire them. Put it that way.
Well, let me ask you a question. You now, I understand, have moved to Elmira, New York, which was
Yes.
the home of Mark Twain. His first novel was called The Gilded Age, and it was about Washington, D.C. And it was about the story of an appropriation through Congress and what happened to everyone involved. And it was sort of a tragic comedy because the innocent and the pure were destroyed, and the guilty and corrupt were rewarded. And
Wow,
that was
sounds
like his
eerie.
last novel of Washington. First and last, then he started to write more humorous fare like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. But I think you should read that book because its subtitle was A Tale of Today, and it's still a tale of today. I mean, in fact, there's a guy who's exposing waste and fraud and corruption of the government, and he dies tragically. And then there's a woman who becomes a lobbyist and a prostitute, and she succeeds and becomes a big society hostess, and so forth and so on. So this is all Mark Twain, not me speaking.
I have not read it, but I did hear of the title. So yeah, I'll be
you
very
can get it
curious to
on
look at
Kindle
it.
or from your local library. It's called
Sure.
The Gilded Age, A Tale of
Gilded Age.
Today.
Yeah.
Not the Golden Age, the Gilded Age. And it's about Gilded Age Washington. But it was extremely interesting. It follows an appropriation. Wall Street is in it. They're always going up to Wall Street, and they finally get the appropriation, and of course, all the money in the appropriation has already been spent on lobbying for the appropriation and on Wall Street loans to cover it. So now they need to get another bigger appropriation. So no, it's true. That's the plot of the book. But meanwhile, all these other people have fallen by the wayside in tragic ways. So it's very very satirical. But it's like that was the only hope I had, was that the system hadn't changed since Mark Twain's days. Yet somehow the country has survived, and some good outcomes have happened. So
well, I know that. Listen, the reform efforts, like I said, even going back to Charles Kraus, which is also part of my story, whom I met and had my painting on show at the Center for Contemporary Political Art in Washington, D.C. back in 2019, I believe it was. He was the journalist at the Washington Post who did a big deep dive into the scandal of that year in 1976. And he discovered then how the Smithsonian had created these private corporations, these slush funds, where they were basically laundering the taxpayer appropriations and making them disappear. And money was going into the Smithsonian and just vanishing. And after like 12 articles he wrote, he was taken into the director of the Washington Post office, and he was told to stop, no more. And he looked at me with that look of, yeah, they told me to stop. It was very, very clear that someone had spoken to them. that they were not to continue this investigation anymore. You're like, wow, this is the type of power that's wielded up there. It's quite gripping. And it's, I see the Smithsonian as sort of similar to the Catholic Church in the sense of, in America, it's an institution that has been here since the beginning, and for good cause and for good reason, or for good with good purpose, a noble purpose. Even though James Smithson was no great philanthropist, people tried to make it out this was some great big. It wasn't. James Smithson was a bastard son of two royal lines in England. He was born in Paris. He died in Italy. No one wanted anything to do with him. He tried to give his money to his nephew. He tried to give his money to this other woman in his will. He tried to give it to like multiple people, and no one could take his money. And at the end, he had like a little default in the event that you can't give it to the United States. So that whole aspect of the Smithsonian Institution, for good or for bad, we hope that it will one day turn out to be for good and maybe resort back to its original founding roots, and maybe do some good. Maybe it will be, and it has. I don't want to say maybe do some good. Maybe it will turn out to be good for me, should I say, which would be nice. So,
well, speaking of good for you, you've moved back to the United States. I know you stopped doing paintings of Trump at a certain point. What are you painting now? What are you painting now?
I've had a wonderful season in Spain. I just got a container of all my paintings just last week and arrived back. I have some new work. Spain is, the Marbella is the town of my childhood where I grew up. So beautiful, so the countryside, so upstate New York's magnificent. It's just a whole different type of beauty. And so very inspired by just the sunflowers, the raw nature in space. Very, very, very beautiful. The light in southern Spain is something very special. I can't explain it other than it's very special to that area. And, my work has reflected mainly the natural scenes, the mountains where I grew up, very important to me. And that's been my theme. And always nature just inspires me. I'm an impressionist and a post-impressionist. So
you're doing, your recent work is paintings of nature in Spain.
Sure.
Is that
Sure.
right? Now, I'm wondering if you could get the Spanish Cultural Institute in Washington to have a show of your work, just to thumb your nose at the Smithsonian,
Well, Larry, my painting, listen, I haven't seen my Trump painting in 5 years. It's hidden. It's like I built it into a wall. I'm in my art studio now. I got this wonderful building up here in Elmira, New York. I've had a tenant for the last few years. I had a studio in Virginia where our children were prior to my mother getting sick and us going to Spain to go through that ordeal. But coming back at this time is very interesting. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but this painting was sort of hidden it's a huge 7 by 15-foot painting. It's part of this building I built inside this warehouse where it could be cool, heated or cool. And so it's in this crate, and I'm surprised by suddenly this whole issue with Sajet. And I think that if Destiny's hand is involved in this painting, which I believe it was since its creation, for good or for bad, however, it can be used for the benefit, I believe, of this country and of our story as Americans, that it would have its day, because up until now it's just been rejected and mocked and ridiculed and maligned. My life was just turned upside down because of it. And so maybe that we're in a period where some redemption and vindication will come, Larry, maybe. I'm always an optimist.
David Mamet once said that America is a story of redemption and second chances. So I hope that's true in your case, and I hope you finally get into the Smithsonian, that locked gate guarded by Cerberus. And you get your picture in eventually at the end of the day.
It would be wonderful, because you can't deny this, Larry. As wherever our opinions of Trump are, he is the consequential figure of the last, I don't know how many years, a long, long time. I was inspired to paint that painting because of that. Way before most people were supporting him, most people that I knew were supporting him, they all thought I was nuts. This was the summer of 2015. just weeks after he had walked down or come down the elevator here in New York, and I'm in upstate New York, obviously. So there is no doubt, and even the prophetic nature of it, that this was a prediction that he would become that it was painted as the president, and everything that's the symbolism in that painting. Even now, if you look at it, it's remarkable. And we're talking about this was years ago. That's 2015. That's 10 years ago. It's 11 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago. Yeah.
And if you look at the actual picture, and you look at his official portrait, he just had a new portrait taken, which seems to be a photograph.
I saw it.
It looks very similar to your painting.
It's very similar. I've seen that, Larry.
I mean, I think you could actually put them side by side. It might be interesting just for a display. And it's like, what's going on? You know,
but the exciting thing for me, Larry, and maybe you can come up for it, is that I plan to, depending on what happens, if the Washington Post publishes the story that they interviewed for me the other day, if they do that and it brings attention to it, I told them about it. I said, wouldn't it be great if you guys come up? We'll get people local to come, the local folk, and we're going to pull this thing out of the wall and uncrate it. I haven't seen it in 5 years. It's been locked away. That's quite interesting. I wonder if maybe something happened to it while it was in there. Maybe, who knows? But I'm literally 100 yards from it where I'm sitting right now, and I'm excited at the thought that this thing is there. My wife the other day, I said, "Sweetheart, do you remember that she said, "Oh my goodness, the Trump painting's here." She couldn't even remember that, and it's this huge work of art that is just sitting hidden in a wall, and I'm very curious to see what may take, because no matter how you view it, it's a historic piece of American art, and that is the criteria for the Smithsonian Institution. That's the criteria for the portrait gallery, is the historicity of the subject. And so you can't argue with it. That was it from day one. So let's see. Who knows?
All right. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. And I think that's a good note to end this interview with, unless do you have anything else to say?
Nope. It's been great to chat, Larry.
Okay, well, we'll say thank you, and we hope to talk to you again soon with further updates. And thank you all for watching. If you want the book, it's called Odious and Cerberus, and I'm trying to unlock my Kindle here to get you the actual. It keeps doing this. I think I keep touching it.
Yeah, Larry.
Oh, hold it down a little.
Yeah, Odious and Cerberus, an American immigrant's odyssey and his free speech legal war against Smithsonian corruption, by artist Julian Raven.
And thank you, artist Julian Raven. It's available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and you could get your local bookstore to get it, or ask your local librarian to order it for your library. I think you'll find it a very interesting read and a real insight. Honestly, it could be a novel because it's so surreal. Some of the stuff is just like totally surreal, but I won't go into that now. We'll come back and we'll do another show as this thing develops with Sajet. If you say Monday, we're going to find out, maybe next week even. And thank you again. Bye-bye.